G'day there, Paul Lyons here from paintings.nz. Not feeling too good today. I've been suffering from allergies for the last, nearly 24 hours in fact. So I thought I'd try and make life easy on myself this evening, and I found a nice simple composition. Whether it'll turn out to be a simple painting to do, of course, is another question, but a nice simple composition. There's a cloud formation over the hills in the Wairarapa, which looked very much like the top of a mountain. And I know you're not supposed to paint interesting cloud formations, but I thought I'd do one anyway, just for the, well, as I said, because I'm not feeling terribly on top of things at the moment. I need to find a pencil. I've only got paintbrushes. I don't know what to outline this cloud shape in paint. I want to be able to remove it, so I'll just see if I can find a pencil. So I'll turn the camera off. Right, I found the pencil that I was after. Thought it was sitting beside me on the table. But yeah, so there's a sort of cloud snow cap in the sky, and well, there's some hills whose exact shapes are not very important at all, but well, I'll put them in just for the sake of having something to do, and don't think we need to do very much more preparation than that, really. So the first thing is to get some underpainting for the sky, and I think we'll go for a yellow underpainting. There's not a lot of colour in the sky, but I think there is some yellow towards the horizon. One of the things that people are always very emphatic about is that you need to clean your brushes. That's true for oil paints and for acrylics, but it's not so true for watercolours, because you can always reactivate watercolour paint. Not so much when it's on the paper, but when it's in the brush, you can always get the paint to loosen within the brush, as may be apparent while I'm spreading this clean water over the surface of the paper, because there's some pigment left in the brush, which I'm not particularly concerned about, but it's getting onto the paper just a little bit. So my standard approach to painting large areas in a single colour is to what have I got on that brush? My standard approach to painting large areas in a single colour is to spray water, or spread water over the area, and then rely on the behaviour of the wet paint to more or less even out the spread of pigment on the paper. This is going to be a little bit of a challenge around this cloudy area, but but we'll hope. We can always hope. Do a lot of hoping. So pick it up and just go and reflect the room light. Ooh, that was not the brush I intended to use, was it? My first big mistake. It's the right shaped brush. Yeah. Bit of a mental blockage there. Alright, so now let's go back to what we were trying to do, which was to put some yellow down. Should we do the region around the cloud first? Is that the best thing to do, do you suppose? Or is it a disastrous thing to do? I don't know. We'll just try it and see. The yellow that there's down near the horizon, and I will try to spread the horizon, not the horizon, I'll try to spread the yellow up into the sky, just away, not all the way to the top of the paper, but just to have some gradation. Alright, and we'll stop it at that point and dry it. Righto, well, we've allowed that to dry, and I've rubbed out the pencil lines on the cloudy area, because the more paint you put on, the harder it is to get rid of the pencil lines. In fact, you possibly can see that in the areas where I've already covered over the pencil line with paint, it's still there, so it's not a big deal, but it would be nicer if it was gone. So back to wetting the area again. Oh, and the reason that I've erased the pencil lines is, of course, that now I can see where the cloud is without them, because there's yellow paint to delimit the cloudy area. So I have the exciting business of just wetting the paper now. Maybe not quite as exciting for you as it is for me. There we go. Water. This brush for detailed work around the tops of the hills, do I? Because they're going to be dark. Alright. Detailed wetting done, now we can do the broad areas. See, it's carrying yellow up from the bottom, so we're going to have a green sky. Oh well, never mind. Just doing this up in the air because I can use the reflections of the ceiling light to tell me more clearly where the paper's wet and where it's dry. Because, as I've said before, if you have the area near the tops of the hills, which you tend to do as I'm doing at the moment by painting them in I really shouldn't do this. I should just go across. In fact, why don't I do that? Because it doesn't matter if the sky colour goes in to this area, because we're going to paint over it with dark. So then we shouldn't end up with a halo around the edges of the hills, although we'll probably end up with one around the cloud. I can in fact see that drying just around the cloud even now. Alright. I think that'll just about do. And since this brush was so eager to get in on the act early in the business, in the proceedings with its blue paint, let's allow it to have a go, shall we? More blue paint sitting there on the palette, left over from before. Not very wet, is it, that brush? It's one of the reasons why I don't like using conventional palettes. Picking up of paint is not as effective as when you use paint that's already liquid, like this stuff from the droppers. There we go, that's giving us a much more acceptable blue. Even more paint on there, shall we? Well, the sky in my reference photo is not terribly not ready for that yet. The sky in my reference photo is not terribly deeply blue. It's early morning. So let's see if we can even this out a little bit. This really does seem to work to produce a fairly consistent colour that I don't find I can get by using the conventional technique for painting large areas of a single colour, which is to do a wash. You know, you put your brush, so you angle the paper like this, and you brush across, and then there's a bead of water that forms at the bottom, and you then pull that down with the next stroke of the brush and go on and on down the page. And it's supposed to produce, and some people seem able to produce, a completely featureless area of colour. I can't do that, but I can often get a fairly even gradation of colour by this technique of swirling the brush around on the surface of the paper to distribute the paint a bit. Now, that yellow is showing through there. It's green, of course, but so that you can see is sort of evening out. I find that in the camera monitor, the colours always look far more uneven than they do on the paper. I don't know why. The emphasis of increased contrast in the camera, perhaps. So there's a line of pale there, which I'm trying to deal with, and I think that's kind of going away, isn't it? And you can see where the edge of the yellow was as well. But that's not so bad. And I think we need to try to soften the edge of the cloudy place. Just now, the hope is that by putting the water in there, I can convince the paint to flow into the water and not to have the water flow into the paint. And of course that's exactly what's happening. But, well, maybe it's not such an awful thing to have happen. Maybe I'll put a bit more blue in there. No, it's the bloom is happening rather more than I want. And I think at some stage I'll go through and try and very delicately put some yellow into the cloud, but not yet. Was that Thomas Aquinas who said that? He wasn't talking about clouds there. This is blossoming and blooming all over the place, and I do not want that to happen. Let's see if I can do some of my moving of colour around. It's really the wrong scale with this brush, but I don't think I can use the big one. Should have quit while I was neither ahead nor behind, I suppose. No, I'm trying to deal with... I'm always optimistic about these things and say, oh, I hope this will disobey the laws of physics. And it never does. Well, it's occasionally I manage to get away with it, but not very often. Work on the small scale and then compare what you're doing with the area around and find that you've done something that just doesn't fit with it at all. Right, well that blue was dried very patchily. Darker spots all over the place. I'm going to leave it for the moment, and maybe I'll... it's a bit damp still. I'm going to leave it for the moment, and I might come back and do another layer of blue later. But for the moment, we're going to work on the hills. So, distant hills are blue, but it's a very dark blue. Mind you, it's going to be darker as we get closer, so we need to be careful not to make it too dark. So that's... we want to dull it down a bit. We don't really want a very strong blue colour, so let's put a bit of last night's leftover green in there, some red. If you want to make green, always add blue to the yellow. Don't do it the other way around, because yellow is never very strong and you end up using huge amounts of yellow. So I've just disobeyed that rule, and I didn't want to make a very strident green. I only wanted a just not yellow, just not blue colour. And I'm adding a bit of red there now. That's about the sort of colour I'm after, I think. Just something that's not a strong blue. Okay, so I mean, I've drawn hills here, but it's not that terribly important that I follow the lines, because the hills are pretty much arbitrary. This brush is not... Oh, it's better. I was going to say, this brush is not... be helpful if I had the words available to me before I actually start saying these things, wouldn't it? This brush was not producing a nice fine line as I dragged it along the edges of the hills, but I seem to have got it wet enough now to do that. It's still not really quite behaving. There we are, that's better. And how far across do I want to take it? Do it the other way. Always use as big a brush as you can possibly manage. That's the advice they give. You end up not spending a lot of time worrying about fine detail. Well, so go with the theory. So let's modify the colour ever so slightly for the other hill, because it's further away. This little... Oh, I think this is my original, might be my original broad brush, and the feature about that brush is that a moth got at it, presumably a moth larva, and ate across the bristles, so that's why that bit is sticking out a bit. It's been modified by the animal life. Just put in a mountain peak there. Trying to get a hard edge down here for the range of hills that goes below, without compromising the shape of those hills too much. And also get some sort of continuity, consistency about the colour of the hills that I'm ostensibly painting. By defining this line, I'm actually defining the top edge of this row of hills. Okay, so we've got a bit of colour mismatch there, but I think we'll leave it and say that it's just the variation in colour of those hills, shall we? Now, no, it's more solid. Yes, there we go. And see if I can harden up that line as well. I'll just use the other brush. Why make life more difficult for yourself? Use the biggest brush you can, but if there's something that's too detailed for that brush, go to a smaller one. Alright, that'll do. Now, next colour. Is for these hills. So again, there's fairly bluey, deep blue colour. But we need to deepen it. And needs a bit of modification. Still a fairly saturated colour, even though it's very dark. So we'll add some yellow to it. I think that's helping to decrease the saturation just a little. Let's add a bit more yellow. As I said, you need to add a lot of yellow, so let's turn it green. But when we add the blue, it's not very green, and just one drop of red there, I think, has taken the greenness out of it, and I think I've done enough to paint that area, but I might add a bit of water to here as well to enable it to spread across the paper quite well. It's not dark enough though, is it? Nowhere near dark enough. I seem to be running out of neutral tint. That's a disaster, because I don't have a lot of neutral tint. I may not have another tube. Some tubes you can get in 37 milliliter, or some paints you can get in 37 milliliter tubes. So I use painter's primaries, red, yellow and blue. At least at this stage of my painting I'm using red, yellow and blue mainly for the paintings I'm doing, with occasional forays into other colours. And you can get 37mm tubes of those colours, but not neutral tint. I've just taken that colour over the edge and it's going to start blooming in a minute. Might be lucky. We might. Huh. And the watermark in the paper is down here. Saunders Waterford it says, but I'm not particularly keen on having it read through the painting. Just trying to put a bit of shape into the hill. That one's all right, probably. And if that didn't sneak up into the other part of the painting, maybe. So I think I better dry this before I paint the closest hills, because if I start putting paint on there, I'm sure I'm going to get backruns coming up. So let's dry it. And this really, really dark bit at the front here. Covering over that deck ledge. I don't really need to, but I find it helps me to not have a hard edge at the bottom of my painting that distracts me when I'm trying to evaluate it. Alright, now this is close enough for us to see trees standing up from the edges of the hill. They don't look particularly tree-like, do they? They're more like grasses, but don't really mind which particular plant species or genus they resemble. Just that we're suggesting proximity with these ragged edges. Don't know whether anything else will show up or not. Probably not. Alright, and on the other side we also have a very dark hill, which I'll just use the same colour for. I don't know why I'm doing this. Carefully trying to avoid going to the other area of paint, but I have in fact dried that, so it should be safe. And again, let's put some trees. Using the corner of the brush, and let's be more explicit about the fact that they're trees this time. So those look fairly like a row of trees going up the hill. Do you want to have some other trees? Because this really, really dark colour has in fact left us with a sort of lighter colour in the middle, which we can take advantage of by putting some dark paint, tree-shaped dark paint over it, so it looks as though there's a a whole bunch of trees. Whether or not that's going to show in the camera, I don't know, but well, we'll see. So there remain, I think, probably two things to do. One is to try and deal with that difference in colour there, which I might be able to do something about, do you think? This time if I start applying water I shouldn't get blooms, because the paint around it is not still half dry. So I'm just trying to tease a bit of pigment out of the right hand side there and pull it over to the left, which seems to have worked for the moment. Whether or not it will remain at the right intensity we will discover. I'm just trying to obliterate these, or at least disguise these very fine white lines that I left in between the areas of paint. Okay, so one of them, as I said, is doing something about that. I don't know whether I've succeeded in dealing with it. Let's actually add some pigment. So yeah, it's kinda alrightish. And the other thing that I want to do is to add a bit of yellow, I think, to that area, just enough to suggest that it's catching the same light that the sky is. But the brush that I've picked out has got gunge on it, old paint. Do a bit of washing. Alright, so yeah, these colours are not necessarily the colours of the original scene, but colour isn't precise mimicking of colour is not the thing that makes you believe in the appearance of a scene. What makes you believe that you're looking at a realistic, more or less realistic painting is much more. I think that's just about what I'm after. I also think maybe I need to just try and soften these edges a little bit. So what makes you feel that the scene is realistic is not so much the colour as the values. And if the relative lightnesses and darknesses of the components of the scene are correct, that's far more important to your recognition of the shapes and the objects in the scene than getting the colours right. If you take a photograph and remove the colour from it, you can recognise the colour. You can recognise what the scene is pretty well, exactly as well as you could before you remove the colour. If you take a photograph and you remove the lightness and darkness information, it becomes almost impossible to recognise what the scene is. And I really do mean almost impossible, not just it becomes quite difficult, it becomes something that you can sort of intellectualise. Oh, that looks as though it might be such and such. Yes, I can see such. You can analyse it and find the identities of the things that make up the scene. But it's not a case of looking at it. Oh, yes, that's so and so, or that's such and such a thing. That's the such and such a mountain. All right, so there's our cloud that looks like a snow-capped peak in front of a bunch of hills in the Wairarapa, going off into the distance in the early morning, so they're not lit. The sun is somewhere behind, and I think that's pretty much it. So thank you for being with me, and we'll catch you next time. Bye bye.